Recording and we're going live.
Okay.
So we will count down for audio. Three,
Two,
2,
one,
1.
go.
Okay, so when we consider the transcendental explanation for near-death experiences, which really does say that there may be something more to these experiences than what we may consider as skeptics, um, some researchers are suggesting that there may be something more than just purely psychological or physiological to these. And instead, there may be possibilities of human consciousness and the mind-brain relationship. Now, what that leads us to is the most common explanation that we're familiar with as anyone's near-death experiences. Oh my gosh, heaven is real. I have met Jesus and God, and I've seen my deceased grandmother Ruthie. And I mean, the bookstore shelves are filled with stories written by these folks who are convinced that they've been to heaven, and that they've had a true experience here. Now, Greg, we were just talking about. Oh, excuse me, I didn't introduce Greg Christensen. Say hello to our audience.
Hello.
Thank you. Greg is joining me for this portion of the discussion, and we're going to get down and skeptical on some of these types of transcendental explanations. The one that comes to mind, of course, is this new movie that just opened up recently. It's called Heaven is for Real. And what it puts on the screen is the story of a young fellow, little boy, 4-year-old boy named Colton Burpo. And he was the son of a small town Nebraska pastor. And what Colton experienced was heaven during emergency surgery. He talks about looking down to see the doctor operating and his dad praying in the waiting room and all that. So Pastor Dad listened to the boy, wrote about it, wrote a book, and now it's been turned into a movie. And Greg, are you going to go see this movie?
No, because I'd probably start screaming.
I think I would agree. What would be the biggest turnoff to you then about something like this kind of experience?
Oh, I mean, the same thing that turns me off from pretty much any kind of Christian apologetics or whatever. It's like the flimsiest of evidence, the secondhand accounts from a 4-year-old who is, I mean, undoubtedly, is it any kind of coincidence that his dad's a preacher? Did he have an NDE and then come back and say, "Whoa, the Vikings were right. It's Valhalla. We got raised like right away." No, of course. I mean, the NDE experiences that Christians have are of a Judeo-Christian afterlife. I'm pretty sure that the exact same experiences documented on the other side of the planet reveal a completely different um, pantheon. A completely different experience of the afterlife. Those who have horrible self-confidence issues and unresolved issues with guilt may come back and say they experienced hell. I've heard of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's all just a manifestation of what's already in your mind. Mhm.
I had actually seen that as well with looking at some of the reading that I was doing, that people will experience culturally appropriate um, deities and things like that that kind of make sense for their own beliefs and their own knowledge, their own understanding.
Right.
I think that's part of the crux and the problem with NDEs is that I have no doubt for a second that these experiences do happen. I believe that people go through something. I don't think it has anything to do with the supernatural. Um, but the problem with them is that you have to rely on the person's self-reporting of what their experience was. And it's very difficult to do any scientific research, I would imagine, on that. Um, another example that I read this book last year and I was kind of under impressed with it is a book called Proof of Heaven, and it's written by Eben Alexander. He's a medical doctor. He was a neurosurgeon and who thought he knew how the brain and the mind worked, but he had a real near-death experience. He was in the brink of death and in a coma with this very serious brain infection. But when he awoke, he had the very typical NDE experience, and that changed his life. Now, I really don't understand how somebody who has an experience and knowledge of how the brain works could be convinced that they've had a true NDE like that they've experienced the supernatural somehow.
How can you have a creationist oncologist? You know,
That
that still blows my mind. I mean, that's I don't know if you were there, but I'm referencing
no.
the same when the Winnipeg Skeptics went to the creationist museum and dinosaur exhibit in Winnipeg.
Mm-hmm.
They had one of the member of the clergy of the church. Well, not the clergy, just a congregation. Happened to be an oncologist, right? So I mean, Monday to Friday he's an oncologist. Uh, Saturday, Sunday, and evenings and weekends, I guess he's a young Earth creationist. And I mean, he was there to put as much spin and revel in ignorance as possible. But I digress now, right? I mean, there's there's no I mean we can absolutely demonstrate the ability to separate our intellect from our wishful thinking, our capacity for supernatural beliefs. You take a look at the his name's escaping me, the Genome Project guy.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know his name either.
Uh, what is it? He's he's the guy that I mean he's fantastic evolutionary biologist who was walking in the park one day and discovered the saw three waterfalls, kind of, one, two, three. So he's like, oh, it's the Trinity. And
Hmm.
oh, geez,
Are you thinking of Mitchell?
no.
No, no.
Oh goodness,
Wilson. Wilson.
what's his
E.O.
first name?
E.O. Wilson?
Oh no,
No. Okay, never mind.
like he is Barack Obama's, or at least in his first term, was his science advisor. Um, and I mean, the guy's a brilliant scientist, but I mean, he's got some pretty crazy beliefs.
Okay. John Holdren. Does that
Nope,
sound familiar?
still not it. That is, well, actually, apparently, John Holdren is a bizarre science czar. Uh, that's interesting. No, he's got the famous book. It came out right around the God Delusion and everything. Francis Collins, I think it is, isn't it?
That's okay. That's another name I was thinking of. Collins.
Yeah, Evolution, Language of God. Um, yeah, we can link to that in the
Language of
show.
God. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. I apologize. Maybe your editor can cut out some of the rambling, but here's a link to his Wikipedia page. Um, in any event, I mean, he's an American physician, geneticist, noted for his discoveries of discoveries of disease genes, and his leadership on the Human Genome Project. He serves as director for the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. Uh,
Okay.
so he wrote the New York Times bestseller, The Language of God, A Scientist Presents Evidence for Belief. And he cites I mean, it's the same old thing over and over and over again. He cites C.S. Lewis, St. Augustine, Stephen Hawking, no doubt out of context, Charles Darwin, no doubt out of context. I mean, it's like I really don't want to use the word, but it's almost like blasphemy. You know,
Mm.
when you hear
Okay.
a scientist or a great thinker, I mean, just betray evidence, reason, the scientific method, critical thinking, to hold on to this belief that they've segmented away from, the rest of science and the rest of how they process reality. It's very frustrating for me, anyways. But then again,
Hmm. Do you think that there may be some kind of unresolved issue in their lives then that leads them back to religion for some reason,
oh,
whether it be a trauma in their life or some type of fear of death? I don't know.
we'll have a fear of death on I suppose some level. I suppose, like, I mean, I'd like to say that I don't fear death or being dead, but I fear, I guess, the process and the transition. I hope it will be quick and painless for me. But I mean, I couldn't really. I think it would be very presumptuous and arrogant and of me to try and play psychologist and diagnose the fears and rationale of
True.
other people's deep beliefs that they hold to be very sincere. All I can really do is just ask for the best evidence that they've got and try and evaluate it critically. Um,
Okay.
I don't know.
So speaking then of evidence, when we're looking, if we want to look at near-death experiences with a scientific eye that relies more on research and evidence, then I would recommend, and this is a book that I found quite interesting. Um, it's called Consciousness Beyond Life: The Science of the Near-Death Experience, and it's written by a European cardiologist. His name is Pim van Lommel. He has also written papers on the subject. And this is interesting because one of the main areas, as I mentioned earlier, is with the number of people surviving cardiac arrest these days and being resuscitated, um, you'll have a lot more people remembering or having near-death experiences. Now, he was a cardiologist, this Van Lommel, and so many of his patients claim to have near-death experiences with the heart attacks that he actually tried to design, and he did, design a research study in a controlled environment in a cluster of hospitals. So they studied that for almost 20 years. In 2001, he and his researchers published their study in the Lancet, and it was really the first scientifically rigorous study. What he does in this book, he goes over the elements of the NDEs. He talks about different experiences, and from his experience, when he's seen these patients, and I'll try a little quote here that he's convinced that a near-death phenomenon is an authentic experience, and it can't just be attributed to all the things that we've talked about, imagination, psychosis, oxygen deprivation. In his opinion, the current views on the relationship between the brain and the consciousness are too narrow. He actually suggests that our consciousness may not always coincide with brain functions, and remarkably and significantly, consciousness can be experienced separate from the body, which I guess is his ultimate conclusion. Now, he didn't go out, really interesting book. He doesn't go out and say that he believes there's some transcendental thing out there, but what he suggests is that he thinks there's something to this, but he's recommending a lot more research and study. And I thought that was a very reasonable conclusion, considering his closeness to the subject, because he's studied these people for a couple of decades.
Well, yeah, I can appreciate and absolutely get on board with more research,
Hmm.
Re- research, right? I mean, although I really have to disagree with the assertion that consciousness can somehow exist outside or a part of the mind or body. It's clearly, a product. I mean, I can alter my consciousness by taking a physical substance, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like i.e. hallucinogenic drugs, you know. Um, there is no me separate from my mind and the chemistry of my brain, you know. A head injury
True. True
could
enough.
damage my brain, right? Well, some head injuries, like not all of them, but that could fundamentally change who I am, and there is no like so that conclusion. I mean, it's wherever he's starting from to get that point is so far removed from, I think, any kind of reality or picture of reality that we know. I just don't see where he's getting that.
I'd have to read the book again. This was 2 or 3 years that I read it, but I respected his assertion at the time. But yeah, take it with a grain of salt. When I was researching this topic, I also came across, um, Michael Shermer, of course, Greg, right?
Yes.
Michael Shermer went, and I'm trying to find my notes on this, and I probably will not remember the name of the researcher, but he tried on the God helmet, and it was by this fellow called Persinger,
Hmm.
who's a researcher, and he's developed the God helmet that uh, a subject will go in there for an hour, and basically what it is, it's magnetic pulses that affect the brain.
Yep.
And what Shermer remembers or experienced during that was a sense that there was somebody else passing by him, another being or an entity outside of him, and he also experienced a sense of briefly being out of his body.
Yep. Richard
So,
Dawkins also described a similar experience.
right. So that's but only one partial experience of what people say happened to them during NDEs, because they'll experience the light, the tunnel, the sense of peace and joy, seeing deceased relatives. Um, so it's part of the experience, but not all of it. Same with the drugs that they've also tried to induce to have a similar experience, things like that. All of these bits of research show parts of it, but it's not the whole experience by far.
Right. Like I'm just taking a look at the. Um, have you looked into the five-stage continuum of an
No,
NDE?
no.
Apparently, like I'm just cruising the Wikipedia article here.
Okay.
Stage one is peace. Stage two is body separation. Stage three is entering darkness. Stage four is seeing the light, and stage five is entering the light. 60% experience stage one, but only 10% make it to stage five, which is interesting because one would think once you enter the light, that's it. That's
Mm. Mm-hmm.
the universal symbol for giving up. But this is Kenneth Ring, 1980, subdivided the NDE on a five-stage continuum. Uh,
Okay.
what body of work that's from, or let me take a look at who Kenneth Ring is. He is a professor emeritus of psychology at the University of Connecticut and the researcher within the field of near-death studies. Uh,
Ooh.
he is the co-founder and past president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies and founding editor of the Journal of Near-Death Studies.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So Ken Ring, I remember this, folks, in the show notes. If you're interested in following us here, that would be a website that I would direct you to if you want more information. The International Association for Near-Death Study. Their website is iands.org. I was, looking through there when I was researching this as well, and I didn't realize Ken Ring was part of this. I didn't realize anybody had staged the experiences in order, so to speak. So um, other sources I had cited or looked at had just, lumped all the experiences together and not suggested that there was a staging to them, that one followed another. It's very interesting.
So his academic journal is listed as in Wikipedia as being peer reviewed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
excuse me, I'm losing my voice a little bit here. A long time ago, there was an episode where we were discussing um, science and so forth. It was you and I were actually both on it. It was the
Mm.
climate one, where Rochelle ran us through um, how to determine a good scientific journal from a bad scientific journal.
Right.
I believe it was influence factor or something to that effect.
Okay.
So, for example, you can have like a peer-reviewed journal, but that doesn't necessarily. It's called impact factor.
Okay.
And now, so I've just been doing some speed googling here while we're having
We're on the fly, folks. We just are mad fingers typing and bringing you the information.
the Journal of Near-Death Studies has an impact factor of 0.00. Um,
That sounds
I'm
low. I'm going to take a wild guess and say that sounds pretty low.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that it's probably
Sorry.
um, yeah. Let's just take a look at this here. Um, impact factor 0.00. 5-year impact 0.00. I would assume that that separates something that was, maybe impactful several years ago. Like let's say you and I were famous scientists and we had our own journal and we were moving and shaking, and then all of a sudden Neil deGrasse Tyson comes along just because he's cool. That's
Okay.
and
O'Neill's very cool.
yeah, and says Donna and Greg have it all wrong, and so on and so on. Uh, so perhaps our 5-year impact factor and our impact factor might produce a different number. If you do happen to get Rochelle on, maybe she can clarify this.
Hmm.
Cited half-life 0.00. Immediacy index 0.00. Eigenfactor 0.00. Article influence 0.00. Methinks we have a fake. I mean, okay,
Hmm.
sure. It's a scientific journal in name only.
Right. Right.
It's,
Okay.
I mean, I'm taking a look at some of the other things here. Like I'm just kind of on a, impact factor here. Like here are some other journals that you might be interested in.
Right.
European Journal of Cardiothoracic Surgery, impact factor 2.4. Um, you know, uh, resuscitation. European Resuscitation Council, impact factor 4.1. So it does seem to go up from zero, folks.
It does. It does. Very
American
well done, Greg. Very well done.
for me, American Journal of Public Health, 3.93. So, yeah, near-death experiences. I mean, like, I'm certainly not closing the door on an actual study. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, if I can just vaguely recall, I think
Hmm.
there have been a few studies done with a critical eye, like, for example, placing an open file folder, right? Like, just your average office file folder with some papers with large clear text on top of a filing cabinet where nobody can see it except for floating disembodied spirits. And the people who have the NDE are unable to tell you what's on top of the filing cabinet when they come back in, you know?
Brad, I'm going to say we didn't plan this, but are you finished with that statement? I agree.
Sure. Yep.
Because that leads me into my next research study. Uh, I'm interested in this one. I don't know if you've ever heard of there's another researcher called Sam Parnia,
Okay.
and he has been doing for the last few years a study based on that thing alone, because yes, we have all I've read the stories about people who were say they were in the operating room, they died, and they heard the surgeons talking. The one fellow, I think there's something about his false teeth. Honestly, I think he heard the nurse put his false teeth in a drawer and they couldn't find them after, and he told them where to find them. That kind of anecdote is the only thing that we've seen. And
Well, you don't think that that if you're in some sort of a light slumber, your brain can still process information? You're,
exactly, and that is why there's no proof to these kinds of anecdotes, and that's exactly my point, that these are all self-reported in that sense. But that is what this study has been doing. It's called the AWARE study, and it's called Awareness During Resuscitation. It's been several years now. It's studying the relationship between consciousness and the quality of cerebral resuscitation and its outcome. So patients are being examined qualitatively immediately after their cardiac arrest, as well as at regular intervals. Now, they've used this study of consciousness includes the use of independent markers designed to objectively examine the validity of survivors' claims of being able to see and hear during cardiac arrest, and that's exactly what they're doing. They are putting the items high up in the room where nobody else knows they're there. And I believe, and the interesting part about this is um, I just checked it. There's an update for 2014 for this study. Um, they reached out to this researcher, Dr. Parnia. He explained that the results of the first phase of the AWARE study have been completed and have been submitted for publication, in a medical journal. The study results are now undergoing peer review, so it'll be a few more months. But I think that I'm anxious to see what this holds. If they actually found anything, or if they didn't.
Now, remember, folks, peer review isn't everything, right? I mean, it's a
Yeah.
great tool, but if you're peer reviewed in a journal that has an impact factor of 0.00, um, I'm just going to throw it out there.
Exactly. We'll see. We'll see if it actually gets published, and we'll see if it's peer reviewed and things like that. So it doesn't say anything about what publication they've been submitted to or anything. So,
Hmm.
and it could disprove them entirely. It could really uh, debunk the whole thing that people actually really, leave their bodies and things like that. So it'll be an interesting study. I'll be waiting for that one.
Reminds me, like some of these studies just kind of come up with like the absolute funniest things, you know. Like for example, well, I was actually just listening to a podcast today about the claims of the Mormon Church and the ancestry of the Native American peoples. You know, they claim that they were, Israelite tribes, right? That
Right.
over, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in 1870-ish, I think, when Joseph Smith was making these claims, you know, I'm pretty sure he never dreamed of, he thought it's an untestable claim. Well, here we are in 2014, and it's testable.
Mm-hmm.
And, there are a number of genetic studies. The the sum total of them found that 100% of the native population of North America is from a region in Siberia. I forget the name, but it's like they can pin it right down to, I think, near a lake in Kazakhstan or something like that. Or it's pretty cool. Um, and I mean, you've got geneticist apologists, you know, um, for like there were in the mitochondrial DNA, I believe there were five major factors, and the top four factors comprised 96% of the genetic material.
Mm-hmm.
4% was harder to analyze. So you see the God of the gaps argument getting smaller and smaller. First it was 100%, then it was 4%, then when significant genetic studies happened on that 4%, that incredibly rare um, genetic frequency that, and I mean, like in any significant population, right? There's going to be some rare genes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this 4%, they found out it came from the exact same lake in Kamchatka, or not Kamchatka. I'm thinking that's Risk, Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan, Siberia area. Um, it just took a little longer to properly study that, right? So then it's now gone down to, I think, a number that is quite close to zero, something like 0.004% that that these genes could have originated um, apart from that. And even if they did originate apart from that, they would have come from Europe or the Middle East. Then it would have been a population that migrated specifically from um, the Europe and Middle East into Siberia, and then also over the Bering Strait and through North America, um, as well as if they arrived on boats and landed in the middle of North America, you would expect genetic drift both north and south, fanning out from that point. But the only place that the genetic drift and they can track it fans out from the Bering Strait, going south and out, indicating that the point of origin was up there, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm doing what I do on pretty much every podcast. I'm way off topic and rambling.
But you're interesting, Greg. You really are.
The,
I
the,
hesitated to stop you. It was interesting.
the point I'm trying to make is that when we start looking at science and stuff against religious claims, a it's there's God of the gaps going on like crazy. It's everything's good until science chips away and chips away and chips away, and next thing you know, God is basically balancing on a pinhead of
Mm-hmm.
right. Um, and with these near-death experiences, like you take a look at um, this study, which seems relatively credible, the objects on filing cabinets versus what passes for evidence in Heaven is for Real. Um, the kid seeing his father praying in the operating lounge,
Or in the lounge.
or whatever, right? Are you kidding me? You don't think that would have happened either way? I mean, what else would his father have been doing?
Exactly. I agree. And who knows how much a 4-year-old, like I really don't know the story, I have not read the book,
Well,
but 4-year-olds absorb an awful lot around the house.
oh boy,
And
ever.
yeah, so I think it would be easy for the child to be influenced even unconsciously, totally unconsciously by knowing what the parents are thinking about or especially if you started talking about having an experience and then the father picked up on it and went, "Whoa, please tell me more." Yeah, so
Sure,
I
abs.
agree.
And I mean, another thing, he recounted um, tales of stories that of things that happened before his birth. So that's luck. That's a luck. It's a near-death experience. Like that's what passes for evidence because I know absolutely nothing about the events that transpired prior to my birth. Nothing. And the fact that I do, and that I am aware of Roman history and all sorts of stuff, indicates that I'm probably a vampire from True Blood. You know, I could be up to 2,000 years old, Donna.
No doubt about it.
Yep, yep.
Yep, I agree. And I'm actually my belief is I'm the reincarnation of Marilyn Monroe. Um,
Okay,
because I was born like about 7 days after she passed away, so I just inherited that amazing likability and sexiness and hot stuff. So I agree. I agree.
yep.
Well,
Well, that was
well,
fun.
Greg, it has been a blast. It has been a blast. So near-death experiences, yes or no? Do they
Oh,
really happen? First of all,
um, oh, it's a phenomenon that happens. There's no doubt about it. I mean, do I dream? Absolutely. I have some really great dreams some nights, and they're a lot of fun. But are they real? No. They're products of my mind, and you can't separate my mind from me. It's all one big old package driven by chemistry, and that's the way it is. Chemistry and biology. I hate to
that's
uh,
all.
I hate to sound like you know, like a stick in the mud here, but um, there ain't no souls around here.
Well, you got it, folks. We're just chemistry and biology.
I'm
Well,
sorry if I don't know if anyone takes offense to that. I apologize.
Greg, thank you. Uh, and I'm going to wrap it up there. That is it for today's episode of Life, the Universe, and everything else. You've been listening to Greg Christensen
Good,
and
folks.
Greg Christensen
Goodbye, folks.
and me. I'm Donna Harris. Goodbye and thanks for listening. Bye, Greg.
Bye.
Well, that was fun. I'm going to stop the broadcast.